Hi everyone, and welcome to International Women's Day here at DEPT. I'm coming to you from the New York office, and I'm here with Clara Mutali, who we will introduce in a minute. I'm Missy Forstall. I'm the Global COO and America's CEO here at DEPT, and I'm really excited to kick this off by saying we at DEPT were just nominated by Newsweek to be the best workplace for women in America, so I'm really excited about that. We're happy to welcome all the DEPTsters, and especially the women and people identifying as women, to our International Women's Day here. And a special shout out to those who are celebrating Women's History Month. We've had a really exciting week here at DEPT celebrating across the board. So I want to start by learning a little bit more about you and introducing you to the crowd here. Awesome. So Claire, I'll start with you.
Cool, thanks Missy. Hi everybody, I'm Claire Schallbrack, Managing Director at DEPT. My team is responsible for working with brands and delivering creative and tech projects to help them achieve their strategic objectives. I am super excited to be on this panel. I'm newly back from maternity leave for baby number 2, so excited as a working mom to be talking about all things women.
We're excited to have you back. Natalie.
Hi everybody, I'm Natalie Conde. I run an organization called AI for the People, and we are really interested in reducing bias in technical design.
Great, well I'm so excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about kind of 2 big themes today. One is around inspiring inclusion, and then we're going to go in your neck of the woods and talk about AI and how we can use that to inspire inclusion as well, and have a good chat about that later. So the first thing that I'd like to note is that the International Women's Day, the theme is around inspiring inclusion, and I'm going to actually read the theme that they have from their website. And the idea is, imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together we can forge women's equality. Collectively we can all inspire inclusion. And we were joking before, but the symbol is to do the heart symbol, which I'm really bad at, so I'm not going to embarrass myself again by trying to do it. But let's start first with, for both of you, what does inspiring inclusion mean to you, either in your personal life, your career, or both? I'll start with you again, Claire.
Yeah, great. I think for me, the theme this year really resonates with me, just being, getting to come back into my team and seeing how our diverse teams are working together. And I think in such a short period of time, a sense of really welcoming difference and wanting different opinions and voices in the room has certainly been the volume of that has really turned up in the last couple of years, and I think we see some of our favorite projects and our favorite work really represent all kinds of different perspectives, and our clients are also really demanding that, which has been very exciting. So I see a lot of momentum in this space and excited to see more.
Right.
I think for me, first of all, I love the theme, so congratulations, Deb. But I think for me, it's about life cycles, so not just thinking about inspiring women, but what happens when you're a woman with a small child, or you're a woman that is aging in your career, and it's these kind of different ways that we show up throughout our lives, making sure that the places that we work, the homes that we're in, really embrace those people at those moments, and we have the support to do that.
I love that. That's great. And for me, I would say when I heard the theme that International Women's Day had this year, I really kind of honed in. I was quite literal about the inspire and inspiration. And the first thing that kind of came to mind for me also was we've talked about inclusion a lot, and I feel like sometimes we're talking to all the same people. We're talking to women who we're preaching to the choir, and so the inspiration I think sometimes comes out of that. And I think about men, and I know that's a weird one to add immediately, but I do think about how are men becoming inspired, and I feel like I've really sensed that change in the last couple of years. I see it. I always tell the story of my husband being in a car with my 2 girls, and a little boy said something about a woman not being able to become a CEO of something. And as soon as I'm about to lash into him, my husband said, hey, you can't say that, and here's why. And I was like, I've never been so proud that and the boy was going to take more from my husband than from me. And doing that. Also, I look at DEPT and how I'll shout out Dimi, our CEO, is always inspiring inclusion, always saying that our interview pipeline and slate, reminding me that I should be interviewing as many women and men, and I'm like, I know, I'm very into that, but I love that he reminds me every time. It's really important for that. So I'm excited about men taking notice for that, which is great.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more around inclusion in the workspace and what that also means within leadership. When we look at some of the C-suite levels across the board, only 60% of the C-suite positions, the 68% of the C-suite positions are held by men.
Right.
And then when you start to look at and talk to women who are in the tech sector, it's a 2-to-1 ratio still that they're feeling from women to men. So we still have a long way to go. And I'll say here at DEPT, we are B Corp, which means that we're really looking out for inclusion, both from a society perspective as well as an environmental perspective. And we have an inclusion report for anybody who's interested in reading more about it. And we have made some good strides in the last couple of years, still have more to go, but really want to understand from both of you, what's some of the specific problems that you think women have with taking on these leadership roles, and how can they feel empowered to apply for those roles to begin with and feel that confidence in doing that? So Mitali, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm definitely gonna shout out the company again. We were chatting before about the mentoring network.
Yes.
And I think being in an environment where mentoring is so central to the mission should be extremely inspiring. And women in the company and in your pipeline should be asking really deep questions about what does that look like? What does it mean? How can I use and leverage these opportunities to move up? And I think managers should also kind of not just make space for those inquiries, but actively elicit those questions, because it's awkward when you don't have the power to be like, as my manager, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And so I
have a little bit more interaction and actually try to gather that information from you as well.
And I think that can be really inspiring, knowing that you have a manager that really expects, welcomes, has a plan for you, is just so comforting. And you could potentially change a woman's life taking that approach.
100%.
Yeah. I think that saying "you can't be what you can't see" really resonates with what you're talking about, Mitali. And I think when I think about the problem for inspiring women, I think women are inspired, but I think they don't give themselves permission sometimes, and they wait until they feel like 100% ready for something. And I mean, with any sort of leap in your life, having a baby, taking a really big, you're never ready for anything. Like, that's the secret. So, so I think just understanding that and seeing other people who have done it, and people who maybe look like you or think like you, I think that's really important. So, so that's something that I think we could take on and spend a little bit more time with. So.
I agree, and I think all of us have talked about having imposter syndrome and what that brings, and I think so many women, feel from that. I know early on in my career, I was interviewed for a role, was given an offer, and actually said no because I didn't think I could do it. And I tried to break up with them, and I said, I can't, I think you've got the wrong girl, I cannot do this. And Wenda Harris-Millard, one of my mentors still, called me and said, you have to come in the office. I'm like, gonna have to break up with her in person. She said, you can do this, you've been doing this. I promise you, take the role. And I thought, fine, well, if I fail, it's her fault, not mine, and blah, blah, blah. 2 weeks into it, I was like, I could totally do this. And I was doubting myself even when someone else was doing that. And she really helped to pull me up and realize that. And I think as women who are supporting other women and men, to be able to take that extra step to really push them to believe in themselves is so important. And we need more people like Wenda around doing that for us. All right. So next question, how can we educate people, colleagues, people we're working with, some of our friends who are asking those questions, to get more support for women in the workplace? I know, Natalia, you mentioned our mentorship program, which we launched on International Women's Day last year, and we're actually this year are adding on to it and doing a mentorship program for moms returning from work. So we're trying to pair them up with old moms like me who have been through it and can hopefully offer some guidance. But how can we help to do things like that? How can we educate people to do this in a better way? Claire, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think there's a lot to it. I think to demand a lot from your company is important, and you have all the sort of rights to do that. So to demand sort of a what's my career progression look like? I need more support here and there. I think to really speak up for yourself and advocate for yourself is super critical. And then I think just to like you were talking about with your husband, to have people of all different perspectives to be able to sort of see and identify and really like build in that empathy into the company to say like, okay, this person is newly back to work from maternity leave, or this person's taking on a new role that might be difficult for them. If I was in their position, like what would I need to be successful, and really making sure that you're supplying those people with the support that they need to do their jobs the best way that they can.
I think in my career, I think case studies have worked, specifically because in my case, it's race and gender that are kind of coming at me at the same time. And here in the US, there's been this great example actually in the last 2 weeks of a TikTok creator called Risa Tisa who did 5 hours worth of content. And if you think about TikTok being this like short attention, 400 million views across that, she was attacked because this is a heavier, African-American woman, heavier, and she went onto TV and basically said, but there are people like me, and people want real stories, and people really want to connect. And she just got signed by CAA yesterday. Wow. It was in the Hollywood Reporter. She is now going to be engaged in writing work. So she works in law enforcement in Georgia, and now she's going to be working in Hollywood. And what that did was it was a case study. It was a case study around content creation. It was a case study around compelling storytelling. And it was a visual case study that you can be an overweight woman in your rollers, driving in your car. There was no production value, but this value has been brought out. And I think whenever you can bring non-traditional folks in, like women in leadership, and show that it works, people follow. People like success.
And also just not having that one-way information of like newscaster or whatever it is, teacher to do it, to actually have someone who's living it to be able to do that and prove, now that they're signed by CAA, that people do want to listen to that is so important. I think one of the things that you said in there, which I also think is really important, is just education full stop, right? I often say this at DEPT, but I look around the room and I think that everybody on every team wants to do the right thing. Of course they want more inclusion. Of course they want the numbers to go in the right space. I think that a lot of people are stuck and they don't know what to do. And I felt like that too sometimes. I'm like not exactly sure I know this is the right thing to do, but I don't know how to do it, and I'm actually might be afraid to ask the questions. And so I think it's really important that we help to educate how to take the good thinking and those good thoughts into action. Like how can you actually do this? And to take back some of those case studies to say, well, this is how another company did it, or this is how another person did it. Let's learn from that and actually put it in there, because people are doing their day jobs and not aware of that. So if you're able to understand how to really make that actionable, I think would be beneficial.
I think there's one thing that we I know we sort of touched on, but education in terms of getting rid of gatekeeping, especially when we're talking about senior leadership positions and moving into more of a leadership role. There's just that door that sometimes is closed, and people are like, well, I don't know what even happens or what is it that job entails. And so I think yes, mentorship is a part of that, bringing people closer, sort of breaking down the barriers to say, why don't you come join me in this meeting or join me in this call, and to kind of shadow and watch people in those positions to demystify them a little bit. I think is also really helpful.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
That's a great point. So when we look at more traditionally male-dominated roles like technology, also creative, what have you seen in other companies that can inspire inclusion and women in leadership in those roles? Whoever wants to start.
I've definitely one of our partners is Google. And it's been really interesting watching how when a team is coming forward with a new idea or they need executive buy-in for something, they've actually found a way to use their internal special interest groups, I guess, to build internal support for those ideas. So there was one project we were on where it was focusing on women's heart health in the United States. Women die of heart disease more than any other thing. It's our biggest killer. And the way that they built support internally was by going to the women's group. I think Black women had a higher rate, so they went to that group. And they got all of this constituent support from folks that were most impacted. And I just thought that was such a great way to meet your colleagues. Yeah. But it was also a great way to show those groups how that innovation would help them. And then that larger support meant that by the time the pitch got to the senior team level, that there was already a case study.
Right.
And so there had to have been something in that culture.
And it's also finding that specific need, like heart health we know, and we could, again, you could, that word action, like you could actually take action on figuring out how you can create that place for them. I love that.
And aligning with their values, that they present the world's information, and the pitch that they used to their senior leadership team was that we want to present the world's answer. And we have gone internally, but that's a cultural thing. Yeah. The fact that they were able to do that, I thought that was really cool.
To be supported in doing that, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think on the values point, and sometimes it's the obvious answers, but I think actually spending time for some of these more, I guess, male-dominated companies to sit down and write a 2024 plus value set and say, this is what we're not going to compromise on, this is how we want to operate, and be uncompromising about it with people in management positions and leadership positions, and bring them along with the journey, because I think sometimes we have an expectation that people just inherently understand this, but they don't. And so to put things on paper and really hold people accountable to that helps everybody kind of move the company forward. So
make gender equity one of the points within that value system. In public health, there's this idea that you can integrate an idea into everything. So in every operation that DEPT has, gender equity, whether it's the bathrooms, whether it's hiring, whether it's promotion, whether there should be a gender equity lens.
Yeah, and it's funny because we actually do a lot of that at DEPT. Like, not only is it in our goals internally, but like I said before, we actually report out on it, and to be part of B Corp and be able to be named as a B Corp company, we have to, we can't.
It's amazing.
And I've been at other companies that have talked the talk but haven't walked the walk. Like, of course, yes, you want to do that, but we are actually holding ourselves accountable publicly to be able to share those numbers, and also go out and say, hey, we want to be carbon neutral by X date, we want to be 50-50 men, women by Y date. Like, we have gone out and said that, and so having that accountability and mapping to your values is a huge part of it. And then also just that day to day, making sure, again, people saying you got to make the slate full, all of that, and the process that you do throughout that has to drive to those overall goals.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the only other thing that I'd say about that is, I think that one of the ways in which we can make that successful is also to figure out the belonging side of it, which is, we talk about DEI a lot, and it's really, I had a long talk with someone in our organization around it's really DEIB, but the B being for belonging. And I always think about the story that years ago I was at a different company, and we looked to promote someone who basically for her manager was a checkbox. It was, okay, got the DEI check, I'm good. And I remember saying, like, she's not ready for that role, like she's a little bit too junior, blah, blah, blah. Nope, did it. She failed. Like, there was not enough support around her. Ultimately, she ended up getting fired. And it was, so it was a bad look. It was very unfortunate for her. It was bad for the company. And everybody's looking and saying, oh, well, see what happens when you try to do that. Right. And in fact, it was the company's fault for not actually putting the support system around her to be successful. So what can we be doing more? And I think about this all the time when people are stretching into that role, like, what are we doing in any way, shape, or form, getting them official mentorship, getting an executive coach, whatever that may be, to be able to step into that role in the best way possible versus just checking the box, throwing them in the ring, and then figuring out what happens. So I think the belonging part of it needs a lot more attention.
Yeah, for sure. I think the U.S. Army, and if you know me, you'd be like, she's talking about the U.S. Army. But the U.S. Army actually do a really good job of this. Here in the U.S., when abortion was taken away as a constitutional right, they actually allowed for people who could have children within their workforce to access reproductive care if and how. They would pay for it, they would hide their identity, they would give those people their time off, because they want they want people to be in good physical and mental condition. And they deemed at the highest levels that you have to be able to access healthcare in order to do that. And that was a bunch of 4-star general, that was men that made that decision. And so I loved that kind of leadership around scaffolding, because I'm never joined. The Army doesn't want me, so I don't even know why I'm saying this. But that also shows you the culture. I think you do pretty well there. I mean, I think if they want like a general talker, like I could just go and speak to them. But
AI for the Army. I mean,
right. But that was men that made that decision.
No, and that's another great example of a case study to start saying, like, this is a heavily male dominated area that's actually reaching out and doing something different. I love that. Yeah. Great. Cool. So let's go even a level deeper. So we've talked about inclusion, we've talked about leadership. Let's talk about DEI within there. What are your thoughts about? There's been a lot of rollbacks recently. So some of the my girls are knee deep in colleges, and I know a lot of the colleges are rolling back some of the DEI requirements. You hear of major companies in the United States rolling back the focus there. What are your thoughts around what's happening globally and how we can actually try to inspire to be more fair-minded across the board, Natalie?
So one of the things about that I think people don't realize is that rollbacks in the United States reverberate across the globe. So one of the partners that we have at AI for the People are based in India. And one of the things that they had been looking at was algorithmic bias against Dalit populations. And Dalit are the most discriminated group of people within their society. And they were saying that there are rollbacks for affirmative action in India based on what's happening in the US Supreme Court. And you'll see there've been rollbacks in the more kind of mono-racial countries across Europe and others, because it really undermines this principle that our workplaces should reflect our populations. I think US companies are handling it in various ways, but it really does depend on the values of the company. And it's just been Black History Month here in the US, and I recently was at a huge law firm. If I said the name, we would all know it. And one of the things that they did for Black History was to look at what they call the most promising Black employees across the company. So these are people who have partnership potential. The only thing that would block them from partnership was bringing a book of business, because that's one of the requirements in that law firm. So what the senior non-white partners, mostly men, went to that group that included women and folks that identify as such, and took them to their top clients, took them to dinners, showed them how they developed that book of business, introduced them as their proteges. So instead of the top partner taking the call all the time, this person was now in the chain. Now, to your point, many weren't ready to take over the account, but they're suddenly on the email chains, they're in the conversation.
And they're getting a taste of it, and they're getting they're getting exposed to some of the most senior members of the team, which has benefits for them and for the team. So.
And they're getting buy-in. So they're seeing their retention numbers go up. They're seeing those people being more enthusiastic around work, going back to the belonging question. And without saying that this is DEI, the work of making sure that your workforce are inclusive is being done. And when I asked why, they said, well, by 2042, we will be a minority-majority company. We're now in 24. In the next 20 years, these could be our highest earners, and we want them to have a great start.
2042, that sounds very
sounds
scary.
very futuristic.
Yeah, it sounds like the Jetsons
like
to me.
It's actually only 2 product life cycles away.
I know, that's crazy.
Shiver.
Crazy. Great. So let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about your sweet spot of AI. I know in talking to you, you have some strong opinions, Natalie, around the maturity of AI and its ability to actually make change in the workplace in general, never mind diversity, and not forever, but maybe now. So can you talk a little bit about your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'm going to roll it back just a little bit so that folks understand what I'm talking about when I say AI. And it's a suite of technologies that can either automatically predict something or automatically make a decision. So I know you had a really good decision making.
Yes, I've just been playing around with some ChatGPT, and I was like, I gotta learn this thing. So I now have 2 boys, one's 3, one's 7 months, and I was like, how am I gonna juggle these 2 kids? Like, what does my day look like? Let me ask ChatGPT. So he spit out to me a schedule that was pretty good, and gave me some good tips.
Helped,
it did help. Gave me some good tips, some good ideas. Some things that weren't so great, like expecting my 3-year-old to play quietly by himself. I don't know, but the rest of it was some good ideas. So.
But what it did from a technical perspective was take your prompts and then make predictions about you. Make predictions that if your 3-year-old can sit quietly, it assumed that your 3-year-old isn't neurodivergent.
Right.
For example. If it said things like feed the baby, it assumed babies need to be fed, right? So it's making these predictions. But that's really low stakes, because you could have looked at that and said, this isn't going to work, this is going to work. When we think about using that in the workplace, these are sometimes really high stakes decisions that you're making. It could be the difference between huge revenue pullbacks. It could be people's jobs. It could be, if you're asking who to fire, you don't want to be doing that. So because the predictive technology isn't there, it's not thinking about every single scenario. What it can do for managers is help them kind of map out what's going on. You could train a model. It doesn't have to be ChatGPT on your current workforce. You all are a big global company. And you could ask it things like, where do the women work in the company? And if you find out that all the women work in operations and HR, then you know that there is something about women not working in revenue or technical or creative. There are some biases there, because that's the only reason. There's no reason that they should only work there. If you're asking, okay, we have this gender equity total, what do women of color look like? What do Black women look like? What do disabled women? And as you get that information, it helps you understand where unconscious bias is creeping in, and it enables you to develop a plan. But you cannot ask GPT for the plan, because it doesn't know.
Right. But they can arm you with some information
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you can choose to
It can
use or not.
predict and
Yes.
it can help you with your decision making.
Yeah. So what can we be doing for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years to be able to lay the foundation to make it a little bit more positive? Like if you think about some of the people who are on today, what can we be doing to make that better and get it pointed in the right direction?
Well, first of all, one of the things that I always tell people with AI is that it's not finished.
Yeah.
It's completely half-baked. The way that we design products in the tech industry is that we put out the minimum viable product and then see what comes back. So you can actually, as consumers, not use products that are not helpful because then they'll go away. You can very much lean into products that you do find helpful and use them in particular ways. I always give the example, the only reason that we're not in the metaverse is that nobody wanted to put on a headset.
Yeah.
But that was $50 million worth of investment, and it led to hundreds of layoffs in that, not just in Meta, because that was the big, Mark really went hard, but who wants to be in the metaverse with, anyway, whatever. But, but other companies across the industry started to go into AR, VR, virtual reality, and nobody bought the headsets. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really good example of how the power of the consumer
Right.
Really came in, and businesses are consumers as well as people. And then the other thing that I would say goes back to your education point. In your value statement, you could be saying things like, we are going to use AI as a tool because we know that it's not completely ready. We recognize that it's really useful. And as we see it maturing, as we look out into the world, we will start to integrate more. I worry that people are like, AI, let's use it. And then really embarrassing, horrible things happen.
Yeah, right.
And you're right, and not trust it completely, and it is a minimum viable product, so we have to treat it as such, especially those of us in the technology industry who have done that so many times before, to just really help to build it, help to lean into the things that we think that will help and not to the things that won't.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. So if you think about women and AI, how is AI currently impacting women in different sectors or with regard to employment opportunities? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the big case study that really leaps out to me is the way AI systems are being used in recruitment. So there's a really famous example. Well, I always say really famous. If you're an AI nerd, very famous. If you're a normal person,
yeah, for you it might be famous.
Right. If you're a normal person who isn't a geek, then you've never heard this story, which is great. But 2018, Amazon had developed a recruitment tool. They had a new leadership team. This leadership team wanted the best people across the globe and realized that they didn't have enough women. And so they took the resumes of the people that had done best in the company over I think it was the previous 10 years, and they used that data as their training model. And when they got when they matched it against incoming resumes, they realized that there were no women in the recruitment pool. So the engineers went back and they were trying to figure out why there are no women in this pool. And it turned out that the algorithm had sensed that you were more likely to be a manager of Amazon at that time. So this is about 2016, if your name was John versus any other name. And then on top of that, if you had any hint that you were a woman on your resume, it was automatically kind of what we would call downgraded in the
Didn't
algorithm.
even rise to the top.
No, so you could be the world's best female AI maker of the universe, and you could have got that award and a Nobel Prize for it, and you still wouldn't be, because the word woman was in there. If your name was feminized, if you went to a women's college, all of these things. And so what the engineers did was went back and did more research and realized that the initial people that started Amazon were Jeff Bezos' friends. And he got his best male friends together and they built. They built this company and they did a great job. It's one of, he's now, I think, the richest person in the world, if that's how you're measuring success. And women were really not part of that company's vision until much later. So they ended up not using the algorithm, which is a great success story. And they went back and started to do outreach at business schools. There was an MBA requirement for that particular role. And they went to women's groups. They became very, very intentional. They went back into their workforce, tried to figure out what are the barriers for the women in this workforce? Why aren't we doing as well? And they recreated another algorithm. And I think knowing that a person isn't necessarily reading your resume is great, because it's easy, you know, we can look through more of them, but it is discriminating against women in the workplace.
Yeah, and I like that story because it also talks about kind of looking backwards and looking forwards. Like let's very excited to start it saying let's look backwards, and then the oh shoot, this is not exactly where we thought, but then actually the ability to take action and change something moving forwards. I know even it makes me think here at DEPT in our recruiting process, we have a tool that actually strips out everything to deal with race or gender, so that so if the person's name, everything, so all you are seeing is their skill set, and that's all. You make the decision on that, and then obviously once you interview them, you know what their name is going on. But the first decision you're making. But honestly, that's only part of the problem. The other half is like, okay, how are you even filling that pipeline for them to get you your resume? So there are steps across the entire journey. And I think that that's something that really my eyes have been open to just in the last 5 years, I'll say, is like A, to have the intention, B, to do one thing, but it's a whole line of how it's Jeff Bezos calling his friends to say it. It's the whole line of thinking and changing along the way to get that base larger.
And I think we really need to praise the fact that Jeff Bezos made that call.
He could have just said, oh, well.
And then the managers below saying, it's really weird in the world where 51% are women that they're not showing up. And I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier around, Claire, when you were speaking about values. This recruitment pool does not align with our values. And he also didn't know that Amazon was going to become Amazon. So getting away from blame. The thing that I think really holds people back is blame and navel gazing and guilt. And, we were all terrible. But it doesn't mean that we all have to be terrible.
And I also think like that story resonates because AI, just like lots of different technology advancements, is a tool in the toolbox, and it might not be the right tool for the problem you're trying to solve. So, so I love that they went back to kind of like brass tacks, analog, outreach. Let's go make relationships. Let's go meet people, and that might be the right tool sometimes for what you're trying to do. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's the right answer.
But in a weird way, it actually was a tool that taught them that there was a problem. So yes, they were trying to solve one problem, but actually found out another problem, which is, oh shoot, we've got an issue with the women that are working here, and then actually doing something about it, which is great.
And then the very, very last thing, because you are a B Corp, storing AI, creating AI, and then storing the information is incredibly unsustainable. In the life cycle of a large language model, it emits more carbon than 5 years of a car, and that includes creating the car. And so when I'm saying that we can still do something, making the decision as a B Corp that we're going to use these technologies here, we're not going to use them there, I think across industry also means that AI doesn't have to be everything. Because we want an Earth more than we need ChatGPT telling us things.
Of course, and the way I always look at it, it's part of the equation. I've used ChatGPT and I love it, and I'm like, okay, I love that they brought up these points, not going to use them all, but it at least gets the juices flowing and started of the thinking. You don't have to follow all of it. So I think that's the way I look at it. So just to end on the AI portion of this is, you see a ton of things going on in the AI sector. What's giving you hope in the last year from what you've seen? Like, what are some of the stories where you're like, this is amazing and going to do great things?
I am really, really loving how I'm seeing engineering teams look at problems, particularly in the medical community, that have been really, really stubborn, and they're using AI to try and predict outcomes. So I'm thinking in the cancer research space, really being able to create models where you put all the papers around a particular type of cancer into a model, and you want it to predict what are the markers of that disease, and then using that for either drug exploration, if that's your jam, or for clinicians to give them new and updated guidance. I think that's really exciting. Also, when I was with you all last year, I had told the story about Google Real Tone and developing a phone that recognized black skin. Seeing that capability now in mammogram exams has been really exciting, because that is, it's again in the cancer space, but seeing how you can break through something to get a really good phone, which is amazing, but then that same intelligence can be used over here, I think it gives me a lot of hope.
You know, I couldn't agree more. The thing that always excites me the most is the medical community. And if you just, like, again, think about years ago, like, doctors are only seeing what they're seeing on a daily, weekly, yearly basis. But their information is this wide, and yes, they can go to conferences, and yes, they can read magazines, but you can only, as a human being, consume so much. So AI being able to really bring that together and help you, again, it's not going to be 100% right in exactly what you need, but at least it can gather all that data, bring it together, and guide you in a better way than ever before, and that's really exciting.
Super cool.
And then the other thing is from the policy space. So since we've spoken last year, the Digital Services Act has come into law in the EU, and that means that any online information, so for social media, that is harmful towards women, including, and this is my favorite, and this is probably because I'm 13 in my mind, cyber flashing. And I did not know that people flashed women on the internet, but they do. But if you are in the EU, you are now completely protected. That cannot happen. Also, deep fakes and other ways that women are being targeted online isn't lawful in the EU. And the great thing about that is this legislation happening in the EU is being looked at in the US and other regions. And I would love to see a world where women are not attacked just because they use the internet.
Right. Those are very cool. I like those stories. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. That kind of wraps our chat. And then I think we have a number of questions from the group out here. So thank you. So I will start. So more on a personal note is this question: is in your both of your careers, have you ever encountered a workplace that's made a concerted effort to become more inclusive successfully, and what was their method or strategy for accomplishing that?
I mean, I work at one now, so
Good answer.
That's a little tricky. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I know we've been talking a lot about DEPT, but I do think it's been very, very inspiring to have, at the most senior levels, this be a big priority, and then them walk the walk. And that's been really nice, because I think it gets a lot of lip service at any place that I've been, but oftentimes sort of falls flat when things get rocky or the business is struggling or it's been a tough time. We sort of like, we'll do that later when we have more time. There's never a good time, so it's important to do it sort of year round, and I think that's been really inspiring. And I think we've talked about some of the tactics, so I don't need to reiterate, but I've benefited a lot from many of them. So.
I think for me, I'm in the process of adding another string to my bow, because my kids are going to college, which means that I have a lot more time. But I'm going to be doing a PhD at Cambridge, and I'm starting in October. And the people that have really helped me get into that program, and if anybody knows anything about Cambridge in the UK, it's not normal. It's like you have to be a member of a college, and then you have to go over here and do this thing. And it has been a group of white men, and it's been really interesting working with them, because every time they say that it's easier to get a job at Cambridge if you're a white man called Chris, than anything else. And
Not John, at least from the
not
other
John,
company.
Yeah,
but
not John.
all the Chris's have been really passionate that research about women on the internet happens within their institution, and specifically Black women. So looking at intersections, and so lots of education in terms of tactics, but a real commitment from the university that they want to produce the most extensive knowledge in the world, and that means having all kinds of different people coming in.
Yeah. And I would just say for me too, I talked about this a little bit already, but I have been in a number of organizations that have like aligned with my values in
Right.
terms of inclusion and diversity, and have talked a lot about it. But until DEPT, I've never seen anybody take action around it. And I think that is why that's in my head around that, which is, okay, like, yeah, I've talked about this for years, but how are we actually going to do something
Right.
to get it in order? So, okay, great. A new question from the chat. Let's talk about equity versus equality. What are your thoughts about creating better policies surrounding equity for women and experiences women uniquely go through, such as giving birth? Shouldn't our policies be reflective of being inclusive of women's experiences, such as a major milestone like having a child, to create more equity versus having the same for men and women? Any thoughts from either of you
It's
there?
a big question.
Yeah.
And a good one.
So it's around creating better policies surrounding equity for women.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also what we talked about, sort of the you interviewing the company before you join somewhere,
Right.
and as someone that, you know, if you're thinking about starting a family, or if that's a value that's important to you, and that's something that you know you want to do in your life, to really, really interrogate the place before you join it, I think is key. And if the place that you're at doesn't support you in that way, like I think you need to make the changes that's going to work for you, and make sure you're finding places that are going to support those decisions. Whether it's, hey, I want to learn a new skill, I want to get my PhD, I want to move into a creative field, or I want to learn this sort of I want to learn AI, and I want to sort of develop in that way. It's the same sort of answer that should be like, hey, I want to start a family, and that might change the way that I'm working, and make sure you have a company that's going to support you and be flexible. In 2024, I think is a no-brainer. But
Yeah, I would say it's embarrassing if in 2024 that's difficult, but just to get to the equity part, recognize that people need different scaffolding. I know we were speaking earlier, and when I had my youngest son, who's about to be 16, so it is a while, I was working in a TV production environment where we were cutting tape overnight. And my bosses at that time could not understand that I was breastfeeding and literally had not slept since that child was born. And I was driven out of that particular, not just company, but industry. So when we're thinking about equity, thinking about what's the case study here? What does this person need to be successful? I think particularly addressing children, at one point, I have my kids are 18 months apart. Leaving at 3 o'clock to get to daycare pickup is a real thing. So knowing that your company is going to be flexible around time, which is great, I think, since the pandemic, and hybrid work, or being able to work from home, like some of these policies benefit men and women.
And I also think it makes, at least I will say personally, it makes the more flexible the work environment, the harder I work.
Yeah.
Because I will, like, they're giving me something, and I will give 110% back because of that. I think it's really important. And then the other thing I'd say also, some of it is like policies with a capital P, and then other is around just general day-to-day. I've been really impressed. I work a lot with people in the Netherlands and Europe, and the amount of men who will say, yeah, I can't take that meeting because I have to go home and do X. That never happens in America. And I'm like, wow, this is great. So then guess what? That means when I say I can't make that meeting because I have to take my daughter to the doctor or whatever it may be, I don't feel guilty or weird or like, I'm saying this because I'm a woman. It's actually completely normal to do that in so many different and Europe does it a lot better than we do, but I think even if you're not a European company, to make that normal and to be able to have senior men say, "Yep, I'm on duty tonight to take care of the kids. My wife is out doing XYZ, so I'm doing this."
Yeah, I think,
and make that normal in a day-to-day policy.
Or I'm eating with my family.
Right. Right.
That is a ritual. That's where we reconnect.
I used to call it the golden hours. Like when my girls were little, I would have dinner and give them the bath, put them to bed like from whatever 6 to 8, and I was like, I'm off.
Yeah.
I'll come back online at 8, and everybody respected that. But not, I was lucky that I had a company that did that.
There was someone gave me the advice to parent loudly in today's day and age. So to be really like, to not pretend that my kids don't exist as a working mom. Like they're there, they're super important, and they're more important than my job, frankly. So yeah, I'm gonna make it all work and try to balance everything. I love my job, but it's not negotiable to spend that time, and to have a company where you're at that understands that, I think is.
And I would say, I grew up in the UK, but I run an American company. And one of the first things that I instituted when I took over the company was that we take August off. Because in Europe, people have...
Are you looking for people to start with you?
I know, but the Americans...
Are you floating this to Missy?
Yeah.
So August off?
We take August because people in the European
awesome.
context have 5 weeks off. And so, and I had school-age children at the time, and I wanted to do stuff with them in August. And so people were so shocked, and they were like, well, do we get our 10 days? Do we? And I said, yeah, we also take time off at the end of the year, but what I'm expecting for you is to be efficient within the time that we work. But you have the right to take vacations with your family, to rest, to do whatever. And this is what would happen for me in the context, the work environment I'm used to.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you just want 10 days, that's your business, but don't contact me in August. Like, I'm not here.
I'm not going to answer. Yeah, I love that idea of parenting loudly. I know because my kids are 16 and 18, and I remember multiple people saying to me when they got to know me, like, I didn't even know you had children.
Yes.
And then I felt like a horrible mom because I'm like, but part of it is like I wasn't sharing because I was in a room with all men and didn't want to be like, oh, I have to do the blah, blah, blah. They didn't talk about it, so I wasn't going to talk about it. And so I like the idea that that's becoming more of a thing. So that's great. Okay, next question. Are either of you lucky enough to have had a female mentor in your careers, and what about their mentorship helped you succeed as a leader?
Oh my gosh, so many. So many. Maybe some of them are watching, I don't know. But the person that comes to mind that I always shout out is my very first boss in the advertising space, Layla, who was the managing director of a social agency called We Are Social when they were launching in New York. And I was a newly minted account executive, very ambitious, and I think was really inspired by the way that she led that business, the way she grew that business, her just knowledge across really everything that we did. I thought she was kind of godlike when I was working with her. Scared of her, but more inspired by her. And I think it sort of goes back to what I was saying, if you can't be what you can't see, and seeing her, wear a brightly colored dress in a boardroom with an airline company and pitch them a social media campaign. Back in 2010, I thought that was just really, really inspiring. It's definitely helped me in my career.
I love that. Mine is a woman called Jennifer Humike, who is at the MacArthur Foundation, and that was the first money that came into AI for the people. And she was just like, you have great ideas. You should set up a nonprofit. And I was like, I should? And she was like, yeah. And I'm going to give you $250,000. And I was like, you are? And she was like, yeah. And then she was like, and then you need to, and she went through every system that I would have to set up, how we were going to budget the money, how we were going to do finance. And then about 18 months in, we got attacked. I got attacked personally in my relationship, my personal, professional brand was being attacked, and and I went back to her and I was like, I couldn't do, oh my God, like you've believed in me and I couldn't do it. And she was like, that's called racism and sexism next. And just having, and this is a white woman whose goal within philanthropy is to move forward equity. And she was so inspired by our mission around making sure that women were going to be safe with these new technical products, that even when I made mistakes and I wasn't perfect, she was like, okay, and she used her power to really like sponsor me and protect me, but at the same time really hold my hand.
Right. And make you realize like this is happening to you and what you can do about it.
And made me want to be that type of person.
And do it for others.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, for me, I would say, I talked about Wenda before, but also I would shout out my sister Kathy, who is a lot older than I am. She's 13 years older than I am. And so I saw her as a young woman, you know, becoming very successful and also balancing 4 kids at home. And I remember thinking, oh, you know, wow, you can have a really good job that you're super passionate about and also be able to have 4 kids. So for me, from a personal perspective, that was something that really resonated. So I think we have time for one more question. What are some tips that you've picked up during your career on overcoming the feeling of imposter syndrome as you moved up to more senior levels as women? And how do you make sure to consciously take up space in the room?
Yeah.
Have we?
I don't really have the imposter syndrome. I don't know where I got this from, but I feel like I belong in all the rooms I'm in. So I'm just like, hello, I'm here, and I'm going to tell you my opinion. I think one of the things that was trained in me was to learn the craft first and really develop the skills, the hard skills of what I'm talking about. And then once you learn those hard skills, just to kind of be yourself and let your personality and
then
find
you'll
your own
always
style.
feel,
Yeah. So and having that sort of the expertise handy and knowing that I was talking about things that I knew and I had experienced and I had done the work, like really, I think the imposter syndrome just kind of went away. So
I'm similar, and I think for me it was being introduced to Toni Morrison. By high school, which was amazing. I went to high school in the UK, so that's actually a huge thing. But I was introduced to Toni Morrison, and there's an interview that Toni Morrison gave, like I got obsessed with her, where she basically said that racism and sexism are not her problem. And so she wasn't going to solve them, she was just going to be herself. And that, replaying that along with, it's kind of like a split screen in my mind. So I have Toni Morrison in my mind, and then I also think about the mediocre men that I have met who do amazing things, and if I can even be half as mediocre, maybe I will get as far. And realizing that there is a real art in just saying you're going to try.
Yeah, just putting yourself
gonna
out
try,
there.
and it's not your fault.
Yeah.
And then again, finding the people like Jen, who I could really speak to, and who would name a thing.
Yeah.
And that helped us develop strategies.
yeah.
Great. Well, I think we are at time. I could talk to both of you for another 2 hours, but I like ending on that note, is just like putting yourself out there and believing it, and not listening to some of the stuff that's out there.
Listen to Toni Morrison.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, she got a Nobel Prize. Like, she knows.
She knows what she's talking about.
Yeah.
But thank you both so much for this conversation. It was such a great, we're going to invite you back to the next International Women's Day. We love having you here in Tally, and thank you, Claire, for being here. And thanks everybody out there. I hope you had enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.